So since I don't think that there is hope for me anymore, I want there to be a message. I want people to know. And the truth is that I am so tired. I was going to write this long letter and have everything in this neat package with a timeline for you, but too much has happened. I'm just too tired. So there'll just be another dumb long video, I guess. 3 years ago when I first applied for a transfer, that wasn't because problems had started. That was because things had gotten so bad that I thought it was time for me to apply. And the truth is that it's only in hindsight that you can start to see the damage that it's done. And I can see that I should have gotten out of there a long time ago. But when you have barriers, I guess is a nice way of saying it, and you have a disability, it's not as easy as that. And I know a lot of people think that anyone who's in housing is like some kind of a bludger or whatever. But I've been battling this illness my whole life. I've been working my ass off my whole life in my recovery. I haven't always done it right to try and deal with the pain. But I have a family like other people. I have a sister and parents. They're nice people. They mean well. The phrase that people keep saying to me is, the system that failed you. I feel like it's kind of my abuser, you kind of shit yourself when they contact you, which is rare, ever. You only usually ever get contact if you've done something wrong. I understand why people commit suicide with those robo-debts and stuff, because it's just too big. It's so big and it's so broken. And I've been trying to take it on for years because I'm a stubborn idiot and I have this stupid sense of justice or fairness or whatever. And it just seems so wrong. And when I first moved in there was all the stuff that you see in the pictures, and the problems started with it wasn't long that I was in there that I had to get an AVO out on a guy, and I didn't even know him. He was just this guy with this really aggressive dog, and he wouldn't leave my neighbor alone, and she was too mentally ill to get him to leave. So he would start harassing me instead. And I just went along with it. It didn't occur to me to ask for a transfer. I just thought, I don't know, this is how it is, or this is what I deserve, or whatever, the weird mold, the mushrooms that grow on the walls, and the paint that peels, and the neighbours that just leave their garbage literally out the front on the street. Yeah, I just put up with it. I did my best to I would use my pension money to pest control the place myself, and all I really cared about was getting on with my recovery, trying to find a way out, and looking after my cats. It was them that I felt most responsible for, not wanting to upset my family with my suicide. Those were the things that kept me around. And then after that, it just continued, you know, like there was a woman who moved in upstairs who was psychotic, and she would have these crazy episodes, you know, like she'd cut herself in the hallway or out on the street, and police would turn up and just laugh at her, you know. She would shout at me from the window, you know. I'd leave the building and she'd be shouting obscenities at me, you know. And then she died, and the guy who was staying with her was just allowed to stay there, and he's a big ice head, and it continued on from there. And I still hadn't applied for a transfer at that stage. And then things really started to steamroll, and I was constantly reporting it to housing. You know, they have this email address, this T104 thing that they tell you to report to the Strawberry Hills office, and no one ever replied. It was just like this dead void place. No one ever replied, and I would just keep reporting and no one would reply. And occasionally you'd get like a half decent client service officer who would respond in an email, and then they'd just be gone, you know. I've had them say all sorts of stuff to me, you know, like had one woman answer the phone once and said to me that no one even looks at that email address, you know. I had another client service officer tell me that there was nothing he could do, and he was the one that I suggested that I go to my local MP, you know, like I have it in an email. And finally I applied for a transfer because there'd been this guy in the building next to ours. I live on a whole block, you know, it takes up the whole street, and he would shout all day, he would scream all day, and he had this beautiful dog that he would beat. And you know, I called the RSPCA, and that all ended really badly with the dog dying, and eventually I guess they moved him, or maybe he died, I don't know. Eventually then, that's when I applied for a transfer, and that was 3 years ago. And after that, the girl in the apartment upstairs from me, there was a fire, and I think I talked about that already. That's when it all really kicked off, you know. The fire was, I went up there after that place was gutted, like gutted, like it was, the whole place was a blackened char, and I was really worried about structural damage, you know, because it was the apartment above mine. And when they put out the fire, it flooded my apartment, of course, blew the power. We had to all be evacuated. I have post-traumatic stress disorder, so that was pretty bad. And after that, they moved in a guy who, he was a drug dealer, and he brought a bunch of people with him, I guess, off the street. And the place became like, the building became like this kind of wild free-for-all, you know, like people would break in and damage the building. And, you know, like if you're sitting in your apartment, you can hear people like using drugs in the hallway, or busting open the door, or you know, like the buzzer doesn't work anymore because someone broke it, but people used to buzz just all the apartments because they were trying to get in, you know, if he wouldn't answer. And they started like drawing on the walls and stuff like that. All this time I was reporting it. I was filing the reports, the paper incident reports, and emailing them, and getting nowhere, you know. There was a police raid then on that apartment after I'd been reporting it, and at this stage I'd started making complaints as well about the no replies that I was getting, and went to the ombudsman and that did nothing, and he went on the run, and as a result of that, that apartment filled up with squatters who were also heavily into drugs and definitely friends with the neighbour next door. So the whole floor above mine was just, and at this stage, obviously they could tell that it was me who was doing all of the reporting and calling the police, and I didn't want to be doing any of that shit. Excuse my language, but I wanted to get out. So I had to do it the formal way. So they started threatening me and harassing me and stuff in the hallways all the time, and I'm not sure how to describe what it's like, and housing did nothing. They came and boarded up the apartment, and those people, they were just these flimsy boards, and they just came and pulled them off and went back in, and that went on for months. And I would tell housing that they'd pulled the boards off and they were back in, and they would send the same contractor who would put up exactly the same boards. It was absurd. And I'm telling all of this to other officials, like the Ombudsman and the Office of the City of Sydney, and I went to the legal office at Redfern, and everyone's trying to get something happening, and on and on it went for months. Obviously at that stage I just stopped participating in my life. Sometimes I couldn't leave the house. That's my crazy foster cat running around. And it went on and on and on, you'll see it in all of the emails, in all of the correspondence, all this stuff that just doesn't add up and doesn't make sense. And the main thing that I don't think people understand is this gap between what things look like on paper and what it looks like in reality. At all costs, housing don't want people to know or understand what they're doing. They don't want people to see it. That's the main thing. And in that final, I think of it as that final week, that was the Friday that they broke into my apartment. Apparently they'd sent a letter, which I never saw. And I don't see how sending one letter is grounds to break into your apartment, physically break in, no phone calls, no emails, Happy to send emails and shit when it suits them, but not that morning, Later, the only thing I could get out of them was a verbal apology, which might sound reasonable to you, but to get anyone from there to ever admit any kind of a culpability, that's a big deal. If I tried to go back now and find that person and get them to admit that there was wrongdoing, they would never do it. And in that same week, the guy upstairs, the drug dealer, he threatened me in the hallway, about reporting to housing, which I'd only been doing because I was trying to get out. So I left, and I told housing that I was staying somewhere else. And at this stage, there was caseworkers and doctors and all these people involved. And how did they deal with that? The caseworker went to him, the drug dealer, the guy in the flat upstairs, and confirmed to him that it was me who was making the complaints, thereby putting me at risk even more. He rings me up, this guy from housing, and says, I told him to leave you alone, which confirmed, obviously, that it was me who had been making complaints. So after that, there was more outcry, and they acknowledged that it was not safe, and they were asked to provide a risk assessment, which they didn't do. Instead, they gave me this $5 rent thing. And the story has continued since then, you know, with the stuff that I told you about recently, you know, the raid on the building next door, and the next person who's moved in upstairs. They have a lot of DV, a lot of drugs. It's all ice stuff. And I keep getting told, we can't find anything for you. And I just don't believe it, you know. In all of New South Wales, there's nothing. There's no house for me. They said that they were willing to approach the community providers because, for obvious reasons, I don't want to live in a fax TCJ property anymore. I mean, look what happens when you're with them. At least with a smaller provider, I might have a better chance of surviving. So I got put in this position then where they said to me, well, if you're not staying there, you have to give up the property, you know? So then I'd be homeless with nowhere to put my stuff, and also still waiting. I've been on an escalated at-risk transfer list for a year now, and they're still trying to say that there's nothing. You know, there's a lot of issues with, like, they have this automated system where it just looks in the one zone and you don't know if anyone's making any effort to go outside of that, you know. I had 1 week where, because you get 2 offers, and that's in one of my other videos, and I had this 1 week where they tried to put me in a place where it was as bad as mine that I'm in currently, and send me an email saying you still have 2 valid offers. And in the same week I got a letter in the mail saying we need a reason why you're rejecting a second offer and you're at risk of being taken off the transfer list. And this is where I am now, you know. They want me to be back there, subjected to that, even though I'm back on suicide watch. Unfortunately, in that time, both my cats have died. I just lost my main boy this week. He was my best friend. He was my family. He was everything to me. Everything. He kept me going through all of that stuff. I left because I was afraid for his safety. I was afraid that finally someone would break in and hurt him. I didn't even care about me anymore. I just cared that something would happen to him. And they know all of this. They know it all. I hope this reaches someone. I hope someone... There's a lot to sift through. And that's where I'm at now, where I went to the MP and I, you know, had letters of support written, and they want to put me in the hospital. And all of this because I was honest, and I followed their rules, and I filled out their paperwork, and I did the right thing. And what has it gotten me? So I'm telling you,